Hi, welcome to Wetpixel Live. My name is Adam Hanlon. I'm the editor of Wetpixel, and I'm joined today by regular contributor Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Adam. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Happy New Year. It's our first episode for the new year, so I hope 2021 is a better year than 2020.
Yeah, I hope so too. I enjoyed your episode with Ellen, which was obviously your first one of the year.
Yeah. It was good. What we thought we might talk about today is magnified viewfinders. These are very expensive bits of optical gear, and I thought I'd ask Alex quite simply: do you think they're worth the money?
Well, absolutely yes, because you won't find a housing of mine without one on. Yeah. So I guess that's sort of my, once you taste this forbidden fruit, as it were, it's very hard to give it up. So if you don't want to spend the money on one, don't ever try one. Yeah. I have to say that I shot without one for a long time, and that was really a financial decision in that they are generally quite expensive. It's at least sort of $500 to get into them, and a lot of them are much closer to 1,000 or more. So they are really quite significant purchases. On the financial front, I think the thing I would say about them is they do hold their value well. They're an item that is generally pretty indestructible, and they are an item that is reusable through multiple housings. So as a result, their second-hand value is quite high. Whereas a camera housing from 10 years ago is worth almost nothing, the viewfinder attached to it has probably held 80% of its price in the second-hand market, because ultimately it's almost as good. It's pretty much as good as a new one. It may look a little warm inside; it works perfectly. Sure. So I think that's the first thing to say, is that they're expensive to buy, but they do hold their value. So that makes them a little bit more justifiable. The reason that we use them as underwater photographers is to give us the best possible view of either our electronic viewfinder or our optical viewfinder on the back of the camera, to help us compose and be inspired to make fantastic pictures. Yep. And I have to say, for a lot of us, the pleasure of taking photos is a big part of the draw of underwater photography, and something that really, is part of the ergonomic, feeling of taking a picture. And it feels like a very valuable thing to spend money on. So I would thoroughly understand any photographer wishing to buy one. On that front, on that side, the reasons that they help us ergonomically are, first off, they're designed to be used underwater, so they give you space for all that sort of face mask and particularly regulator that you've got. One of the problems as an underwater photographer is, if you don't have one of these on the back of your camera and you're trying to get your eye right up to the back of the camera, you've got a face mask in the way and you've got a big regulator in the way. And those things tend to make it quite difficult to get the camera to right up to the camera. The viewfinder gets your eye away from that. But the main reason people like them is they make that viewfinder in the camera bigger, more inspiring to look at, and they allow you to see really clearly into the corners of the frame. The standard viewfinders that most housings are sold with either generally don't really make it easy to see the corners of the frame, certainly not without this sort of thing moving your head around, or they actually reduce the size of the viewfinder so you can see the whole frame, but then it becomes much harder to see details within that frame and much harder to focus. Yeah. So they're a really valuable thing to do. The other thing that they have is some of them have adjustable focus things as well. So for people who wear glasses, that can be a majorly attractive feature that you can, compensate when you're in the water. You don't have to get the camera set up. And then I don't wear glasses, so that side of it's never appealed to me. But I obviously see loads of people who love that feature in them.
Yeah. I think the one of the things that people often are concerned about is also with these things is compatibility, because you mentioned resale value.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, a lot of brands of viewfinders, actually you'll find that various manufacturers have got adapters that allow you to use other brands of viewfinders with your housing. So in many ways, although you may in the future choose to change your housing brand for some reason, oftentimes the viewfinder will still move with it.
I've got a great case in point, actually. Yeah. I have both Subal and Nauticam viewfinders for my housings, and this is from my D5 housing, and this has currently got a Nauticam viewfinder on it. Yep. And Nauticam do make an adapter. I have to say, I found a part of their adapter, because they hardly ever, I think they hadn't sold one for about 10 years. And, when I got these, and my friend John Barron actually used his 3D printer to print me some parts that actually worked a little bit better than the standard parts. The standard parts were fine, but they were very fiddly, and he came up with a slightly better mounting solution. And I really like that on the housing. So it's actually very easy to make them adapt to different housings.
Yep.
And I use this on a Nauticam Micro Four Thirds camera, and I use the same housing on the D5 on the same viewfinder on my D5 Subal housing.
Yep. It's also worth mentioning that installing them, or putting them in and taking them out, installing them and removing them is pretty easy as well. They pretty much all, by my knowledge, have some kind of arrangement where you've got O-ring seals on the actual barrel of the viewfinder itself, and the inside, and I don't know if you can see it if I move it a bit closer, this has a very shallow groove, and that's basically, in this case, there's a plastic ring that sits in there, and that's what actually holds it in place. Nauticam use an O-ring to achieve the same objective. So the idea,
taking it off here and I can just slide this one off. I'm going to leave it on, but
so the idea is obviously that you can, for example, for travel, it's a pain having this thing stuck out the back. It's very, very easy just to pop it out, travel with it when you get the stick in. Obviously, make sure the O-rings are clean, stick it back together.
And don't forget as well. I think that's... If you turn up on a trip and you've got a big hole in the back of your housing, your underwater photography is going to become quite limited from that point on.
But I guess you'll be able to see the viewfinder very clearly.
Yeah. So I quite often actually travel with a spare standard viewfinder for my housing sitting in the luggage, not because there's any reason I'm ever going to use it really, but I like having it there just in case I happen to forget this or it gets damaged or something. So the standard viewfinder I quite often just leave in the bags. It's very light, it's very easy to travel.
Good insurance policy, isn't it?
So I guess we have to deal with the question that everyone wants us to deal with, which is straight or 45?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So both you and I shoot with 45-degree viewfinders. Just say that to begin with. I think the reason that we both like 45-degree viewfinders, they have a couple of advantages. First of all, they provide a very comfortable angle to shoot the camera from. When you're diving, you're generally relatively horizontal in the water. And if you're relatively horizontal in the water and you want to look straight ahead, you either need a neck that can do 90 degrees, or you need a viewfinder that does half that bend for you. And particularly if you're wearing a thick neck wetsuit or a dry suit, which restricts your neck movement with a thick hood, not having to move your neck so much is much more comfortable. So it's much more comfortable having that angle than that angle, So that's one of the main reasons. The other, I think, big advantage is when you've got a viewfinder like this, it allows you to get the camera really low to the ground, which helps, for all that sort of, shooting on the seabed macro or wide angle. And the viewfinders can rotate. So when you're shooting a vertical picture, I rotate my viewfinder like that. So you still have that very comfortable angle for shooting. Yep. So those are the advantages of the 45, is that it's very comfortable. The downside is that it's quite a lot of effort to learn to use them, because that change in angle takes quite a lot of adapting to. And the advice that I typically give to people is, when you've bought this very expensive piece of equipment, bear in mind for the first couple of days, you're going to hate it.
Yep.
But by day 3 or 4, you'll be starting to get along with it. And by days 5 or 6, you'll be really happy. Start using it with a wide angle lens. Don't stick one of these things on and try and shoot super macro. You'll never find the subjects. Get used to that angle of dangle, as it was, with a wide angle. It's a lot easier to find the subject in a wide angle scene than it is if you're trying to shoot super macro and all those things. But you will get used to it. You will get very used to the angle. However, once you are used to the angle, you'll then find it just as hard to swap back. Yeah. So for me, people, I know lots of people who have both a straight one and a bendy one. Yeah. I do not understand that. You're just constantly causing yourself to switch back and forward. Now, there are things that the straight one does better. And for me, one of the big areas the straight one is better for is shooting directly up or directly down. For example, if you want to, if you're doing a trip and there's loads and loads of directly shooting upwards, the 45 is actually a little bit uncomfortable for that. And the same for shooting down. Like on a muck diving trip, you like, top-down shots on soles, on flatheads, stargazers. The 45 is actually quite difficult for that because you end up having to be over, leaning all the way over. And actually, when I shoot stargazers, I quite often switch to live.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
do the
shoot,
same with like Wonderpuss in the Bottom, that kind of thing. Same sort of thing. Yeah,
yeah,
I shoot that in live view. Yeah,
because the
absolutely.
45 isn't so good for that. So
I think the people the people that are or the proponents of the straight viewfinders, the argument is that basically it's more natural acquisition angle, i.e., everything's
yeah,
in line. And I've heard people say that if they're shooting action, so they're shooting, I don't know, schooling fish, sharks, that kind of thing, that or porpoises, and that they find that they actually can acquire it more. They acquire the subjects more readily because the view is effectively straight rather than an angle. And I would counter that by saying that actually by having practiced with the 45, I don't actually think there's any difference. But I think if I was switching between the two constantly, I would definitely struggle
mm.
to with acquiring subjects with the 45. But I
I,
think once you've adapted, you're okay.
I guess if you're a photographer that's maybe doing a lot of topside and a little bit of underwater,
Yeah,
and you're shooting all the time with a straight viewfinder on that, it's maybe a bit more of an adaptation all the time. You know, both you and I, we kind of predominantly underwater photographers. So,
yeah,
you know, my normal way of taking a picture is with that 45-degree viewfinder in. I think maybe if you're someone who shoots all the time with a straight viewfinder and then goes underwater, it may, you know, with a normal sort of camera to your eye, maybe the straight viewfinder is easier to adapt to. Or if you're underwater photography, it's a long gap between trips. Again, maybe the straight viewfinder is easy to adapt to. But yeah, I think if you're a regular underwater photographer, I don't know anyone who's adapted to a 45 and then gone back to a straight.
no, I agree. Yeah. And I think that's an interesting on a slightly separate note. I don't know anyone who's gone from a magnified viewfinder and has been comfortable going back to a normal viewfinder. So it's where you started out. It's the crack cocaine of viewfinders, isn't it? And you know, I think it's a really important. You know, when people are looking at improving their performance underwater, this is a relatively expensive way of doing it. It's not a cheap solution, but I think it's probably a very, very effective way of improving your imagery. Probably one of the few real pure equipment related improvements that you can make that will make your images better.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, when I did my we did it on the when I wrote the 100th installment of my Be the Champ article. For one of the few pieces of equipment advice someone put in there was buy an expensive viewfinder. It will really transform both your experience and your images. And it is one of those transformative pieces of equipment. One thing I would say against them is that some of the designs, they do restrict your view of your screen.
Yes.
And particularly if you're using a mirrorless camera, you might want to think how much you use your screen relative to your electronic viewfinder. Or if you're shooting with an SLR and you're using an optical viewfinder, but you use the screen a lot for shooting,
yep.
Think about that. For reviewing images, they're not really a problem because you just hold the camera slightly up and you can see the whole screen perfectly well. But they can restrict the view of the screen a little bit. And if you're using the screen a lot for photography, you may want to think about how that impacts things and choose maybe one that's got a smaller footprint, say, than this.
And I think again,
lovely big view. I'm going to see if I can line myself up on it. Can you see me, Adam?
Yeah, I've got you, Alex.
I can see what I'm doing, so there we go.
No, I've got you perfectly. Yeah, you're very magnified.
That's a treat for the viewers.
I think the other, if you're a video shooter or someone that tends to shoot maybe half and half video, and you probably want to choose which way you go, whether you choose to have improved viewfinder performance or a view of the LCD, and that certainly is. I actually, something I was going to ask Alex, because I think you've done this. I've never used one with an electronic viewfinder. I've only ever used it with optical viewfinders. I was wondering what your experiences were like of using it with an EVF.
Yeah, it's fine. I typically don't use it with my Olympus housing, more because it bulks it up a little bit. But it is really nice for that wide-angle macro because of the 45 allows you to get the camera lower and shoot. But I have to, so it's quite nice that they do work. They work better than you'd expect because you kind of think it was like putting a magnifying glass against your television. You're just going to see pixels. But actually, they're nice. They do work well. They're well. Certainly the Nauticam one I've tried. I haven't tried any other setup. But yeah, I really liked it.
So that's an interesting point because, as you say, if you were shooting wide-angle macro and are down on the sand, that would be quite a useful tool really for composing and make it a lot easier in trying to get your head down onto the LCD. So yeah, excellent. That's fantastic, Alex. So Alex's images are pretty much all shot with a 45 viewfinder. So if you go to
that's certainly true.
So if you go to his Instagram account at, I've forgotten.
Alex Mustard 1 on Instagram.
Yeah,
I haven't posted any pictures this year, so that's a good motivation for me to get posted.
Yeah, big stick. So thank you very much, Alex. Thank you all for watching, and thanks to our sponsor for the episode today, which is Aquatica. I'd like to, if you would like to add your experiences of using a viewfinder into the comment section, that'd be very welcome. And please drop us a like if you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you next time.